Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's your girl, TheAfroPix.com. Thanks for watching. Today's review is going to be about a movie called Beasts of the Southern Wild. It was written by Ben Zeitlin and Lucy Alibar, and it was directed by Ben Zeitlin. And basically, the narrative is pretty much an inspirational story that combines fantasy, survival, and philosophy. It's all told from the perspective of a 6-year-old little girl named Hushpuppie Doussette who lives in the bathtub with her daddy. Now, I know that might sound a little weird, but basically the reason why they call that town the bathtub is because the setting of the movie is in a Louisiana bayou that's probably prone to flooding, so maybe that's the reason why they call it the bathtub. So anyway, her dad raises her on his own. The mother really isn't in the picture, and it's not explicitly stated why. He raises her like a boy, and he pretty much teaches her how to live off the wilderness and how to survive. Not only, to fend for herself, but to also appreciate where she's from. So early on at the beginning of the story, we see that Hushpuppie is temporarily abandoned by her dad. And he goes off, and we don't know where he is or where he's been. And Hushpuppie immediately starts to think, well, how am I going to survive? What am I going to eat? What am I going to do? And suddenly her dad comes back, and he doesn't really explain where he's been or why, but he comes back in a hospital gown with a medical bracelet on his wrist. And, Hushpuppie is like, where have you been? Blase, blase. So she tries to fix dinner for herself, and she ends up blowing up her house. And she narrowly escapes with her life. And her dad, he's mad at her, of course, for doing what she knows best. And they get into an argument, and Hushpuppie is struck by her dad, and she hits him back. And when she does, she automatically hears like a crack of thunder out in the back, and she immediately thinks that she's broken the universe. Now, mind you, keep in mind that this story is told from the perspective of a 6-year-old little girl. So when she hears this boom of thunder as she hits her dad back, she thinks that she's broken the universe. So from that point on, the whole entire story is basically a little hero's quest to save her dad from an illness that we don't know what he's dying of, and to save the universe, put it back all together, and to also find out where her mother is. But we see her go through these trials and tribulations trying to solve all these problems. She's on a quest, all in the midst of an onslaught of man-made disasters as well as natural catastrophes. So basically, in a nutshell, that's what the movie is about. Now, as far as the symbolic nature of the film is concerned, we see immediately that it can pretty much be personified within the setting of the film itself. Hushpuppie and her dad, they live in an area that is rural, that is a rustic swampland area, that is just dirty and dilapidated and what many Westerners would consider as deplorable or condemned. They live in a rural outsider community where everyone who is there pretty much rejects technology or modern medicine. And they live in conditions where nature and man-made objects are pretty much intricately woven, that sometimes throughout the movie it's hard to tell what is man-made versus, what is nature, or, what is imaginative told from the perspective of Hushpuppie versus what is actually real and what is actually happening. So sometimes this movie can weave itself in and out of those elements. It does a pretty good job, I think. But the community that they live in, everybody rejects technology, and you wonder sometimes if they're disenfranchised by choice, or is it an acceptance of circumstances that just are beyond their control? Who knows? But I think on a symbolic level, the reason why the filmmakers chose this particular setting is because they wanted to perhaps remind the viewer that everything in life is all about a perpetual need to repair or a perpetual need to rebuild. and that everything in life is fragile, and that we are all, faced with imminent dangers. It's just a matter of degrees, or where we are, or who we are. So I think that's the reason why they chose that setting, was to convey that particular message. Who knows? But we see throughout the movie that Hushpuppie, she has this fearless curiosity about life, and it's not because she's naive. She's well wise beyond her years, but I think it's really because she has a strong sense of responsibility for where she comes from and the earth. And I remember that in one point in the movie, there was this quote that stuck out to me. She said, "We's who the earth is for." Now, I'm not the most religious person in the world, but I did interpret that line as having some sort of biblical meaning or a biblical resonance. Like, the meek shall inherit the earth. I don't know. But I will say that that particular line, if that movie can sum up, or if that movie can be summed up in one line, I think it would be that particular line, because I'm not going to tell how the movie ends, but if you go out and see the movie, and I encourage that you do so, you'll see how the movie ends, and you'll say, "Oh, okay, I get it." Early on, we see that Hushpuppie has a very vivid imagination, and she has a very distinct understanding of life, death, and the universe. And the reason why she knows about this is not only because her dad is like the eccentric, no holds barred kind of guy, but almost everybody in the bathtub acknowledges, the imminence of death, including her school teacher, Miss Bathsheba. Miss Bathsheba, at one point in the movie, she was explaining the extinction of the aurochs, and she even has a tattoo on her thigh. It almost looks like an Indian cave painting, and that's what made me believe initially, like, oh, okay, this is mythology. No, actually, the aurochs is a bovine creature that once existed but went through extinction. And she went on to tell the school children about the imminence of death. And at one point in the movie, she says that we are all the universe's buffet, and that we're all made of meat. I was probably the only person in the movie theater that bust out laughing, but I really thought that was refreshing, because you really don't hear of death in those terms nowadays. You usually hear of death as, suffering, scariness, violence, suffering, etc., etc. But the way they explained death throughout the movie was, okay, the truth. This is the truth. You're gonna die. And I thought that was just funny, but maybe that's my twisted sense of humor. But I remember at one point in the movie, I think it gave a nod to the idea that life itself is predicated on the eating of other lives. Death is natural, and everything in the world, survives by an eating of another substance or another organism. Plants eat, minerals. Well, that's a bad example, but we as humans, we eat plants and they're living things. Even if you're a vegetarian, you're gonna eat a living thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting that a movie like this, told from the perspective of a 6-year-old imagination, would touch, on a delicate subject. I think also that the movie does a really good job of touching on the importance of rituals. Because our society, we as Westerners, we don't really practice rituals like that. And I think it has a lot to do with technology and being a capitalist society. And I'm not saying that there's anything right or wrong with that. I'm just making an observation. But maybe the more rural you are and the more you're surrounded by nature, the more, likely you are to practice rituals and be more spiritual. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just throwing that question out there. Spoiler alert. After the flood had came, everybody, they were looking for each other, and they found each other, and they gathered at a bar to drink. And they had a quote-unquote bathtub-style funeral where there was no crying allowed. It was nothing but fun and food and drinking and telling jokes and laughter. And there was one particular ritual that stood out to me. It was when Hushpuppie was eating a crab, and she was struggling with it. She's a 6-year-old little girl. She was trying to break the crab in half. And her dad, he was like, "You better feast it. Feast it. And so everybody was cheering her on. And she broke the crab and she ate it unmercifully. She was turned into the crab. She was definitely beasting it out. And I thought that that was a ritual. It was kind of like a rite of passage because to me that kind of symbolized her crowning achievement. Not necessarily breaking a crab, but on a symbolic level, you know, being strong and being fierce and just being fearless. And I thought that that itself was a ritual. And then also on the flip side, them having a bathtub style wedding where there was no crying allowed, it reminded me of a New Orleans style second line funeral where, you know, crying is allowed, but it's more so like, you know, we're just going to go ahead and celebrate the meaning or the life of this person that passed. We're not going to dwell on the fact that he or she is gone, but we're instead going to remember the good times that we had with this person. So that particular segment of the film, when they had the bathtub style funeral as well as the ritual in which, you know, Hushpuppie broke the crab and ate it, I think that was, you know, expressing the importance of rituals. And also from time to time, whenever she feels fear or anxiety, she calls out for her mother, but her mother never shows up, which makes me believe that her mother passed because also the wind happens to blow. Or whenever she calls out for her mother out of fear or anxiety, we sometimes hear the rumblings of these wild beasts coming, or we see these wild beasts coming. And these wild beasts are represented by these wild boars with tusks. And on a symbolic level, you know, a wild boar is, you know, everything that we probably despise. They're dirty, deplorable, they're filthy, they're, you know, wild, they're uncouth. They'll eat their own young if the young is, you know, weak or sickly or they're hungry. So wild boars are also ruthless too. So initially all of these things were happening all at the same time. Like whenever she feels scared, she calls out for her mother, the wind blows, these beasts come. So I was confused initially. I was like, okay, so does that mean that the spirit of her mother is, you know, symbolically anthropomorphized by, you know, the images of these boys? So I got a little bit of clarity towards the end of the movie, and this is how I interpret the situation. Basically, the beasts, they didn't represent her mother's spirit like I had initially thought. Instead, the beasts represented her subconsciousness. The beasts represent what we despise on a surface level. Yeah, they're nasty, they're deplorable, they're ruthless, whatever. But on a symbolic level, we despise what we don't know or what we don't understand. And as human beings, we generally don't understand what's in our subconsciousness or what heinous acts we're capable of. Now remember, Hushpuppie's ultimate quest or her ultimate goal was to save her father's life and to also survive by any means necessary. But I think that Hushpuppie was afraid of failure. And I think she was also afraid of being pushed towards such acts of desperation that she would have to embrace her animalistic side rather than embrace, you know, her divinity. And I remember that there was a quote in the movie in which she said, an animal knows when its heart is weak. We all have an animalistic tendency or animalistic capabilities. But at the end, however, she confronts the beast. And at the end of the movie, she accepts the inevitable passing of her father. And by doing this, she becomes both a conqueror and a nurturer. This awareness of death, I think, it allowed her to embrace her divinity over her animal side of being. Now, there are other signs and symbols that are worth mentioning that I'm not really going into great detail about because it would take forever and a day, but I do think they are worth mentioning. One of them off the top of my head, I remember when Hushpuppie was on the offshore party boat that had prostitutes and a whole lot of drunk patrons. The background music, it featured a song by Fats Waller called "Until the Real Thing Comes Along." And I remember hearing this, and this was during a time when Hushpuppie was looking for her mother for help, help and safety. and instead she ran into the arms of a line cook that had tattooed tears on her eye or on her face. And I thought that was so interesting how she would find such peace and solace in the arms of a stranger that potentially killed somebody, um, you know, looking while she was looking for her mother. And it just so happened that that song, Until the Real Thing Comes Along, happened to be playing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Another interesting note was she was also on a boat that was named Grumpy. The boat was going nowhere. I thought that was hilarious. Um, let's see, what else? The name of the boat, the offshore party boat that had all the prostitutes and the drunk patrons. It just so happened that that boat was called Elysian Fields, and I thought that was kind of funny too. Um, so yeah, this movie is pretty much sprinkled throughout. You know, it has a lot of serious topics of discussion: death, poverty, neglect, alcoholism, poor health, the rejection of technology, and human advancement, etc., etc. But it also it stressed the importance of spirituality, survival, the acknowledgement of divinity, nature, uh, not remembering your past, and staying connected to family and community, etc., etc. Things like that. So anyway, though, as you can probably tell, like I really, really enjoyed this movie. I encourage you once again to go see it, and I hope you do too. And whatever you think, however you interpret the situation, please feel free to leave a comment, or better yet, subscribe. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.